In the early 1900s, thousands of families lived in towns where the boss owned your home, your food, and even your church. But these weren't just jobs, they were traps. And for some, trying to leave could get you killed. Imagine your whole life, your paycheck, your groceries, even your house was in the hands of one company. Welcome to America's forgotten company towns, where freedom cost everything. In this documentary, we'll pull back the curtain on a reality most have never heard of. If you stay till the end, you'll understand why these towns disappeared and what they warn us about today. The year was 1905. Deep in the hills of Appalachia, the air was thick with soot and the sky never looked quite right. John Carter, a tall, coal-streaked miner from Kentucky, woke up at 4:30 a.m. like he did every day, rolled off his straw-stuffed mattress, and buttoned the same shirt he'd been wearing all week. He lived in cabin 41. That cabin, just like the others in Harlan County, wasn't owned by him. It wasn't owned by his father before him. It was owned by the company, the same company that paid him to risk his life 800 feet underground, and the same one that could evict him overnight. This wasn't unique. In the early 1900s, company towns were spreading faster than cities. Built by powerful corporations, steel giants, coal empires, textile dynasties, they were supposed to offer workers a better life. But what they offered was something else entirely, something much more dangerous. At first glance, company towns didn't look like prisons. There were homes, general stores, schools, churches, all provided by the company. They called these places progress, a community, an opportunity. John's son even got a wooden toy for Christmas from the superintendent. But here's what nobody realized at first. The rent? Taken directly from your paycheck. The food at the company store? Overpriced. And you could only buy it with company-issued scrip, not real money. You weren't earning a living. You were paying to survive. You load 16 tons and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. Old coal miner song, inspired by life in these towns. Over time, John started noticing things. A man from the mill 2 towns over tried to leave and work for a better wage. By nightfall, that man's house had mysteriously burned down. No one could prove it, but everyone knew. The preacher's sermons? Approved by the company. The teacher at his son's school? Paid directly by the mine superintendent. Even letters were sometimes read before they were delivered. People weren't just being employed, they were being watched, controlled, and tamed. What started as opportunity slowly turned into a trap, and the only thing worse than staying was trying to leave. But in one town, something went horribly wrong. Most people today have never even heard of Matewan, West Virginia, but in 1920, it became the battleground for one of the most explosive fights between workers and corporations in American history. And it started, like most big things do, with just one man who refused to shut up. Meet Sid Hatfield. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. What he was the town police chief of Matewan, a coal town entirely controlled by the Stone Mountain Coal Company. But unlike most lawmen, Sid wasn't for sale. And when private detectives showed up, hired by the coal bosses, to evict families at gunpoint, Sid did the unthinkable. He told them to leave. They didn't, so he ordered his men to open fire. That one gunfight would blow the lid off decades of silent suffering. May 19, 1920. It started as a standoff. By sunset, 10 men were dead, including the mayor. The story made headlines nationwide. For the first time, working-class families in company towns had a hero, someone who dared to fight back. But what happened next would make things much worse, because the companies weren't done, and they played dirtier than anyone expected. Across the country, unions were gaining momentum, especially in coal and steel towns. But the companies had their counter-strategy locked and loaded. The Baldwin Felt agents. Think private military, hired by CEOs. They spied, beat, kidnapped, and sometimes murdered workers trying to organize. In Pennsylvania's Steel District, one union meeting was firebombed. In Alabama, a black miner named Isaiah Morton disappeared after he spoke out about racism in the company hiring system. No one ever found his body. And corporations were terrified because they knew that if workers united, companies would lose control. But fear didn't work forever. Something had started, and its fire was spreading. But one town didn't just fight back, they burned it all down. Let's go back to Ludlow, Colorado. It was a company town for the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, owned by none other than the Rockefeller family. In 1914, miners went on strike, and what followed was one of the darkest days in American labor history, the Ludlow Massacre, April 20, 1914. Company hired forces and Colorado state militia opened fire on a 10th colony of 1,200 striking coal miners and their families. Children died, women burned alive, and the country watched in shock as corporate power turned into bloodshed. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about basic human survival. But perhaps the most terrifying part? None of the corporate leaders were ever held responsible. They built a town and then it vanished. After the massacre, public pressure mounted. Federal labor reforms started to take shape, and slowly, company towns began to die out. Some were bought by governments, others simply shut down. Entire communities, homes, schools, families, abandoned overnight. By the 1950s, most had vanished, but not because they were defeated, because they were no longer profitable. In the end, people like John Carter never became famous. Their children moved to cities. Their towns were buried under highways or simply reclaimed by the trees. But their legacy lives on. They built America's steel, its railroads, its skylines. And they did it under conditions most of us would never survive. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. So why does this matter today? Because the idea of company towns isn't as old as we think. Think of tech campuses where workers live, shop, and work all in one place. Think of company-provided housing that's only affordable if you stay employed. And ask yourself, how much freedom do we really have when one company controls everything? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And those forgotten families from the soot-covered hills might be whispering a warning louder than ever before. What would you have done in a company town? Like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice matters more than you think.